Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to imagine a person who somehow manages to inhabit two completely contradictory worlds at the exact same time.
Mm.
And I don't mean they have, a day job and a hobby. I mean they are a titan in one world and a legend in the other. And the rules of those two worlds, oh, they usually do not mix.
We are talking about the oil and water of the intellectual life, aren't we? It's
Yeah.
that gap between rigorous, logic-driven moral philosophy
Yeah.
and the messy, chaotic, emotional world of fiction writing.
Right. Exactly. Usually you get one or the other. You get the philosopher who sits in a quiet room and thinks about truth with a capital T, and their writing is, let's be honest, it's dry, it's precise, and frankly, often pretty boring.
It can be, yeah. Or you get the novelist, the person who lives in the muck of human relationships, dealing with affairs, jealousy, the smell of the sea, the taste of bad wine,
Yeah.
all the sensory stuff.
But today we are talking about the woman who did both. At the highest possible level, she was a double threat in a way that almost no one else in the 20th century was.
We're talking about Dame Jean Iris Murdoch.
And honestly, the more I read about her for this deep dive, the more I felt like I was reading about a fictional character. I mean, try this on for size. Imagine a friend who writes these incredibly dense, serious, philosophical tracts about the importance of goodness, about suppressing your ego, about basically being a saint.
Okay.
But then the same friend lives a bohemian life that would make a rock star blush.
It's a life full of wild affairs, turbulent relationships, and a marriage that just, it defies any modern categorization. And then she turns around and writes 26 novels,
Yeah.
bestsellers, Booker Prize winners, that are basically about the absolute chaos she sees around her and, lives inside of.
That is the hook. She's the saint and the artist. She's the moralist and the bohemian. And our mission today isn't just to list her achievements. We want to figure out how she saw the world. We want to get inside her head.
And we have a great stack of sources to help us do that. We're looking at her biography, obviously, but we're also diving into her major philosophical work, The Sovereignty of Good, which is a tough read. It's dense, but we're going to break it down.
Yeah, we'll make it make sense.
We're looking at her fiction, specifically The Sea, and her first novel, Under the Net. And perhaps most interestingly, we're looking at the memoirs written by the people who knew her, specifically her husband, John Bayley.
We are going to try to answer the question, how do you live a life of attention? And that's a key word for her, in a world that is constantly trying to distract you. Because if there was one thing Murdoch hated, it was distraction. She wanted to see the truth of things.
And that really is the why for everyone listening. We live in the age of distraction. We live in the age of the fat, relentless ego, as she so brilliantly called it.
What a phrase.
Isn't it? Murdoch's philosophy is almost an antidote to the 21st century, even though she died just before it really kicked off.
We're going to decode her concept of unselfing, which sounds painful, but is actually incredibly liberating. We are definitely going to talk about that marriage. 43 years.
43 years of complexity, yeah.
So let's start at the very beginning. To understand the dual mind, we have to look at the dual origin. Where does a brain like Iris Murdoch's even come from?
Well, she was born in Phibsborough, Dublin, on July 15th, 1919. And we can't just gloss over that date or that place. It's hugely important.
No, 1919 in Dublin is not a quiet time. Not at all.
It's the middle of the Irish War of Independence. The city is a powder keg. There's violence in the streets. There's a massive cultural upheaval happening. She is born right into the thick of this identity crisis for the entire nation.
And her own family seems to embody a bit of a contradiction too, right? Her father, Wills John Hughes Murdoch, comes from this very grounded background.
Right. He was a civil servant, but his roots were in County Down, from a line of Presbyterian sheep farmers. So you have this very practical, earthbound, stoic lineage on one side.
Salt of the earth.
Very much. And he had served as an officer in the Royal Dublin Fusiliers during the First World War, so he'd seen the reality of conflict up close. He's not an abstract thinker.
And then the mother. Completely different.
Irene Ellis. She was a trained singer. She came from a middle-class Church of Ireland family in Dublin. So you have the sheep farmer's son and the singer, the pragmatic and the artistic, right there in the household.
It feels like her entire personality was set up right there in the DNA, the grounding of the father and the soaring artistic temperament of the mother. But she didn't grow up in Dublin, did she? They moved.
No, and this is crucial for her identity. When she's just a few weeks old, the family moved to London because her father joined the Ministry of Health. So she grows up in Chiswick. She's an only child, educated at these very proper, progressive private schools, like the Froebel Demonstration School and then Badminton School in Bristol.
So she's Anglo-Irish, she's living in England, she sounds English, she's educated in the English system, but she has this shadow identity, this Irish birthright that she carries with her.
And she felt that duality intensely. Later in life, she talked about feeling like an exile in both places. Too English for the Irish and too Irish for the English. That sense of being an outsider looking in is really, really important for a novelist. You need that distance to observe people properly.
She eventually heads to Oxford in 1938, Somerville College. And she decides to study greats. Now, I know we throw that term around when we talk about British intellectuals, but I think we need to explain what that actually means. It's not just Introduction to Philosophy 101.
Oh, absolutely not. Greats, or Literae Humaniores, is the intellectual equivalent of Navy SEAL training for the mind. It is a grueling 4-year course that combines Latin and Greek language and literature, ancient history, and both ancient and modern philosophy.
So you're not just reading translations?
No. You are translating Thucydides and Plato from the original Greek and Tacitus from the Latin, while simultaneously critiquing their logic and historical accuracy. It is designed to be punishing.
It sounds exhausting.
It is. It trains you to think with incredible precision. And Iris didn't just survive it, she crushed it. She took first-class honors in 1942.
But again, look at the year, 1942. She is sitting her final exams, translating Greek philosophy, while the Luftwaffe is bombing London. The world is burning down around her.
That contrast is the key to her entire life. It's always there. She's in this ivory tower, engaging with the highest forms of human thought, while the basest forms of human destruction are happening just a few hundred miles away. And she doesn't stay in the tower. That's the important part.
This is the part of her resume that I think surprises people who only know her as a novelist. She didn't go straight into a PhD or a teaching gig. She went into the wreckage of the war.
She did. Initially, she worked for the UK Treasury as an assistant principal, which was essential war work, but fairly bureaucratic. But then, in June 1944, she joined the UNRRA.
The United Nations Relief and Rehabilitation Administration.
Exactly. This was the organization tasked with putting Europe back together. And putting back together is a very polite way of saying trying to keep millions of displaced, starving, traumatized people alive.
And where did they send her?
She was stationed in London, then Brussels, then Innsbruck, and finally Graz, Austria, working with refugees.
I want to pause on Graz, because we're talking about 1945, 1946. The war has just ended. Austria was a part of the Third Reich. The infrastructure is gone. There are refugees flooding in from the east. What is a young woman from Oxford seeing when she steps off the train in Graz?
She's seeing total moral and physical collapse. She's seeing displaced persons, camps, VP camps. These are people who have lost their homes, their families, their citizenship, they're stateless.
And the conditions must have been
Appalling. It's hunger. It's cold. It's mud. It's disease. It's the sheer logistical nightmare of human suffering on a mass scale.
In the outline, it mentions she called this the thinginess of life. I love that.
Yes. That's a very Murdochian phrase.
Yeah.
When you were in a classroom in Oxford, you can talk about the good or justice as these beautiful abstract concepts.
Yeah.
But when you were in a refugee camp in Graz, looking at a family that has walked 1,000 miles with nothing but the clothes on their backs, life becomes very thingy.
Right.
It's about bread. It's about blankets. It's about a visa stamp that can mean the difference between life and death. Goodness is not an idea, it's a bowl of soup.
It strikes me that this experience must be where her philosophy actually starts to form. You can't be a moral relativist when you're standing in a refugee camp. You can't look at that suffering and say, well, morality is just a matter of opinion.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. That experience likely inoculated her against the kind of dry academic philosophy that was becoming popular at the time. She saw that human beings aren't just rational agents making choices in a vacuum.
No, they're vulnerable.
They are vulnerable, fleshy creatures who can be destroyed. And she saw that the act of helping someone, of seeing them as human amidst the rubble, was a real, tangible force in the world.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a word. It was an action.
It's interesting. She also briefly met Ludwig Wittgenstein during this post-war period, right?
Sure.
At Cambridge.
Yes. After UNRRA, she won a scholarship to Vassar in the U.S., but was denied a visa, which we'll get to. So instead, she went to Newnham College, Cambridge, as a postgraduate from 1947 to 1948.
And Wittgenstein is there.
Wittgenstein is the heavyweight champion of 20th century philosophy. She didn't hear him lecture formally because he had resigned his professorship, but she was in his orbit. she met him.
Talk about intimidating.
Incredibly, Wittgenstein was known for his intensity, his almost religious devotion to the precision of language. He would prowl around the room demanding absolute clarity. Even though Murdoch would eventually rebel against a lot of the analytic tradition he spawned, that exposure to his rigor, that demand for absolute honesty and thought, definitely shaped her.
So we have the foundation. She has the classical education from Oxford, the real-world trauma of the war relief work, and the exposure to the greatest philosophical minds of the era. She becomes a fellow at St. Anne's College, Oxford, in 1948. She is set up to be a brilliant academic.
She is. Her path seems set.
But then we have to talk about the other side of the coin, the personal life. The part that wasn't so neat and tidy.
The life that fueled the novels.
Exactly. Enter John Bayley.
They met in Oxford in 1954. He was a literary critic, a professor at St. Anthony's College, and a novelist himself, though not as famous as she would become. They married in 1956.
Now, if you look at the photos of them or read the basic bio, it looks like the perfect match. Two dons, two intellectuals, a life of books and tea and quiet conversation in a dusty house full of papers.
And in many ways, that was their life. It was a partnership of the mind. They had this incredible intellectual connection, but the romantic and sexual dynamic, that is where it gets incredibly complicated.
This is the part that feels like a Rorschach test for relationships. Some people look at it and see a disaster. Others see something evolved and complex. John Bayley has this famous quote, and I still can't believe he said this. He thought that sex was, quote, inescapably ridiculous.
Chuckles lightly. It's a very distinct perspective. And if that is your baseline for intimacy, that it's inherently silly and ridiculous, you're going to have a very specific kind of marriage.
Especially when your wife is Iris Murdoch. Because everything I've read suggests she did not find it ridiculous. She found it essential, powerful, maybe even dangerous.
She was a person of immense passion. The sources are clear on this. She had multiple serious affairs throughout her marriage, and these weren't just flings. These were intense, emotional, sometimes turbulent relationships with both men and women.
We have to name names here to understand the scope. She had a long, very complex relationship with the writer Bridget Brophy.
Which was a very intellectual, very intense connection. Lots of letters, lots of arguments, a real meeting of minds as well as everything else.
And then there's Elias Canetti. He was a Nobel Prize winner, a writer, and by all accounts, a massive, overpowering personality.
Canetti is crucial. He was a dominant, almost demonic figure. He was charismatic, controlling, and sexually demanding. He is the archetype for what Murdoch called the enchanter.
The enchanter. Let's define that. This is a figure that shows up in her books over and over again.
It's the charismatic, powerful male who walks into a room and just bends reality to his will. He sucks the oxygen out of the room and makes everyone, men and women, fall in love with him or fear him, even if he's destroying them in the process.
A kind of psychological vampire.
In a way, yes. And she experienced that dynamic firsthand with Canetti. She knew what it felt like to be under the spell of a powerful, ego-driven personality. And instead of letting it destroy her marriage, she seemingly compartmentalized it, or maybe integrated it. It's hard to say.
But Bayley knew, right? He wasn't the clueless husband sitting at home while she was out having these intense relationships.
He knew, absolutely. You referred to them as discomposing occasions.
Discomposing occasions. That is the most British understatement I have ever heard in my entire life. My wife is with her Nobel Prize-winning lover. How discomposing.
It is remarkably understated. But I think this speaks to why the marriage lasted 43 years, until her death. Bayley offered her something the enchanters couldn't.
Which was what?
He offered her a safe harbor. He offered her a childlike, undemanding acceptance. With Canetti, she had to be on. She had to be the intellectual equal, the lover, the combatant. It was exhausting. With Bayley, she could just be Iris. She could be messy and difficult, and he would still be there.
It's that contrast again. The storm and the harbor. And she needed both. If she only had Bayley, maybe she would have been bored to death. If she only had Canetti, she might have burned out completely.
And this tension is exactly what fuels her fiction. It's the raw material. When you read her novels, they are populated by these exact types of people. You have the quiet, observant characters, often like Bayley, and you have the dangerous, charismatic wrecking balls like Canetti. She wasn't inventing these dynamics. She was reporting from the front lines of her own life.
Which brings us to the engine room. We've talked about the life, but we need to talk about the thinking. Because Murdoch wasn't just writing novels about affairs. She was trying to build a philosophical system that explained why we behave the way we do, why we fall under these spells.
This is the aha moment. This is where we dive into her philosophy, specifically her collection of essays, The Sovereignty of Good.
To understand why her philosophy was so radical, so rebellious, we have to understand what she was fighting against. You mentioned earlier that she hated the dominant philosophy of her time. What was going on in Oxford in the 50s and 60s that made her so angry?
It was the heyday of analytic philosophy, specifically a branch of moral philosophy that included emotivism and later prescriptivism. The big names were people like A.J. Ayer and R.M. Hare.
Okay, lay it out for us. What did they believe? What was the core idea?
In simple terms, they believed that facts and values were completely separate things. A fact is something you can prove scientifically, like water boils at 100 degrees Celsius. That's a real verifiable statement about the world.
Right.
But a value, a statement like stealing is wrong or kindness is good, isn't a fact in the same way. It's just an expression of a feeling or a command.
So if I say murder is wrong, I'm not stating a truth about the universe.
According to the emotivist, no. You are basically just saying boo to murder. You are expressing a personal distaste. Or for the prescriptivists, you're saying don't murder, like a command. But you aren't describing a reality. There's no property of wrongness floating in the universe that you're pointing to.
That feels empty. It makes morality feel like it's just about my personal preference, like choosing vanilla ice cream over chocolate. I prefer not being murdered.
That is exactly why Murdoch hated it. She called it an uncriticized conception of science, dominating all of thought. She felt it reduced human beings to these isolated, lonely wills. In that worldview, we are just standing in a featureless void, pointing at things and saying, I like this or I command that. There's no connection to a deeper reality, no sense of discovery.
So what was her alternative? She called herself a moral realist. What does that mean?
It means she went back to Plato. She argued that good is a real thing. It's not just a word we use to express our feelings. It is a reality, almost like the sun. It exists outside of us, independent of our will.
So it's something to be discovered, not invented.
Precisely. And our job as human beings isn't to create our own values based on what we happen to want. Our job is to try to see the good, to perceive it accurately.
This is where we get to her most famous concept, attention.
Yes. She borrowed this from the French philosopher and mystic Simone Weil, who she admired greatly. The idea is that morality isn't primarily about the moment you make a choice. It's not about standing at a crossroads and saying, I choose the virtuous path on the left.
Okay.
Morality is about what you were doing for the 10 years leading up to that crossroads. It's about the quality of your consciousness. It's about how you habitually see the world.
It's about the seeing, not the choosing.
Exactly. The moral work happens before the choice. If you see the world clearly, if you pay just and loving attention to reality, you will naturally do the right thing when the time comes. If you are blinded by your own ego, by your own selfish fantasies, you will naturally do the wrong thing. The real work of morality happens in the seeing.
Okay, this is beautiful, but it's still a bit abstract. And Murdoch knew that, which is why she gave us the parable of M and D in her essays. I love this story because it is so mundane, so domestic, yet it explains everything.
It is the perfect example. It brings it right down to earth. So let's set the scene. You have a mother-in-law, M, and you have a daughter-in-law, D.
A tale as old as time, the classic setup for drama.
Chuckles, indeed. Now, M is a bit of a snob. She's educated, she's refined. She looks at D, her son's wife, and she is not impressed.
What does she see when she looks at D?
She sees a girl who is common. She thinks D is cheap, undignified, maybe a bit noisy and vulgar. Her internal monologue is just full of judgment. She thinks, my son has married beneath him.
But here's the catch, and this is so important. M is very well behaved on the outside. She's a proper English lady.
Right. If you were watching M on a hidden camera, you wouldn't know she felt this way. She treats D perfectly well. She is polite. She smiles. She helps out with the dishes. She never says a single mean word.
So, according to the analytic philosophers, the Boo-Hooray guys is a perfectly moral person in this situation. She is performing all the right actions. Her outward behavior is flawless.
Exactly. If morality is just about public choices and observable actions, M is a saint. But Murdoch says no, absolutely not.
Murdoch says that M's internal state matters. The fact that she is secretly despising D matters morally. Her consciousness is full of ugliness and illusion.
So what happens in the parable? Does M just stay a secret hater forever?
No. M decides to do the work. Maybe she realizes she's being unfair, or maybe she just wants to be a better person. She decides to look again. She applies attention. She tries to suspend her own prejudices, her own jealousy, her own snobbery. She tries to, in Murdoch's term, unself.
She takes off the ego glasses. She tries to see what's actually there.
She cleans the lens. And gradually over time, her vision shifts. She looks at D doing the exact same things as before. D is still the same person. But where M used to see vulgarity and noise, she now sees spontaneity and joy.
Where she used to see commonness, she now sees freshness and a naive simplicity. She has redescribed D in a more just, more loving way.
And the crucial point is that D hasn't changed. D is exactly the same person she was at the beginning. The only thing that has changed is what is happening inside M's head.
And for Murdoch, that internal shift is a moral act. It might be the most important moral act M has ever performed. She has moved from illusion seeing D through the fog of her own selfish ego to reality seeing D justly, as she truly is.
That is such a heavy idea if you really apply it to your own life. It means that what I think about the guy who cuts me off in traffic matters, even if I don't honk at him or flip him off. It means my internal monologue is a moral battleground.
That's it. That's the whole game for her. Murdoch believed that the fat, relentless ego, that's her phrase, and it's just brilliant,
Right.
is constantly creating illusions to protect itself.
The fat, relentless ego. It's such a visceral image. It sounds like a monster living in your chest.
In a way, it is. And it's constantly weaving stories. We tell ourselves stories where we are the hero and everyone else is an idiot or a villain or an obstacle. Morality is the painful, difficult work of popping that bubble and seeing other people as real, separate entities with their own centers of being.
And she thought that great art, was one of the few things that could help us kill that ego, or at least quiet it down.
Yes. When you look at a truly great painting or read a great novel or even just look at a kestrel hovering in the sky, you forget yourself for a moment. You are pulled out of your own head and forced to pay attention to something else, something real and detailed and not you. That moment of selfless awe is a moral training ground.
Which is the perfect transition to her other career. Because if art is the tool we use to learn how to see, then writing novels is basically building a gymnasium for the soul.
Exactly. She published 26 of them. And she didn't view them as separate from her philosophy at all. They were the laboratory where she tested these ideas with fictional human beings.
She started with Under the Net in 1954, which is actually really funny. It's a picaresque, it's a comedy about a charming but feckless writer in London.
It is. It's light. It's fast-paced. It was selected by Modern Library as one of the 100 best English language novels of the 20th century. But as she got older, her books got denser, darker, and philosophically more complex.
And we have to talk about the big one, the one that won the Booker Prize. The Sea. The Sea, published in 1978.
This book is a masterpiece of psychological horror, in a way, but it is also a terrifying look at what happens when you fail the M&D test on a grand, dramatic scale.
Let's break it down. Who is the main character?
Charles Arrowby. He is a famous, successful, celebrated London theater director who has just retired. He is wealthy, he is cultured, and he is an absolute monster of ego.
The fat, relentless ego with a name and a bank account?
100%. He moves to this isolated, ugly house by the sea he calls Shrough End. He wants to write his memoirs. He wants to be alone with the waves and his own brilliant thoughts. The book is his diary, and he describes his meals in excruciating detail. Anchovy paste, boiled eggs, cheap wine. He is utterly obsessed with his own sensory experience.
It's all about him.
Everything.
Yeah.
But then, one day, he sees a ghost from his past in the village.
Hartley.
Mary Hartley Fitch. She was his childhood sweetheart, the one who got away. He hasn't seen her in decades. She is now an elderly woman, frumpy, with a difficult adopted son, married to someone else, living this quiet, unassuming life in the same village.
And most people would say, oh, wow, small world, and maybe have an awkward cup of tea.
But not Charles. Charles decides that this is destiny. It's fate. He decides that Hartley is miserable, that her husband is abusive, and that he, Charles, is her savior. He convinces himself that she is secretly, tragically, still in love with him.
He starts writing this narrative in his head, the same way he would direct a play. I am the knight, she is the damsel in distress.
And he acts on it. He stalks her. He engineers encounters. He eventually, essentially kidnaps her, or at least holds her prisoner in his house under the guise of rescuing her from her life. It becomes a claustrophobic horror story of obsession.
And the tragedy is, the reader can see what Charles can't see. Because we're reading his diary, we see his delusions, but we also see through them. We can see that Hartley is just tired, she's confused, she's old, she doesn't want to be rescued.
She just wants to go home.
Exactly.
Charles refuses to see her. He refuses to pay attention to the real woman in front of him. He looks at her and sees his own fantasy, his own lost youth, a character in his psychodrama. He imposes his will on her reality, It is the ultimate failure of love.
He is the enchanter gone wrong.
Yeah.
He is trying to force the world to follow his script because he's a director, but real people aren't actors you can just give lines to.
And the novel absolutely destroys him for it. By the end, his illusions are shattered in the most violent and humiliating ways. It is a brutal demonstration of Murdoch's philosophy. If you do not see people justly, if you do not unself, you will destroy them, and you will destroy yourself.
It makes you wonder how much of herself she put into Charles. She knew she had a big ego. She's a famous writer. Was she afraid of becoming him?
I think every creative person has a bit of Charles Arrowby in them. The desire to control the narrative, to make the world conform to your vision. I think she wrote him as a warning to herself and to us.
There is a critique, though, isn't there? The literary critic James Wood pointed this out. He said that for all her talk about creating free characters like Tolstoy did, for all her praise of seeing others as real, Murdoch's own characters often feel trapped by her.
It's the puppet master critique, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wood argued that because she had such a strong philosophical agenda, her characters sometimes feel like they're just acting out her theories. They don't always breathe and surprise you in the way that, say, Tolstoy's characters do.
They feel like chess pieces in a moral game she is playing.
Sometimes. It's a fair critique. The plots can be a bit creaky and melodramatic. But even when her characters are puppets, they are fascinating, articulate, messy puppets. And the world she builds are so immersive and intelligent.
Let's zoom out again. We've covered the philosophy and the fiction, but we can't ignore the politics, because just like her love life, her political life went through some wild swings. She didn't start out as a quiet Oxford don.
Oh, massive swings. If you go back to 1938, when she started at Oxford, she was a card-carrying member of the Communist Party of Great Britain.
Which, to be fair, was almost a fashion statement for intellectuals in the 30s. It was the thing to do.
It was. It was the era of the Spanish Civil War, the rise of fascism across Europe.
Mm-hmm.
If you had a heart and a brain, you leaned left.
Yeah.
But Murdoch didn't just lean, she joined. She was a committed member.
But it didn't last.
No. She left the party in 1942.
Yeah.
And her disillusionment was profound. She later said that the experience taught her how strong and how awful Marxism is in its organized institutional form.
Strong and awful. That is such a specific and telling phrasing.
It acknowledges the power of the idea, the desire for justice, the critique of capitalism, but it condemns the reality, the crushing of the individual, the dogmatism, the lies. And this haunted her professionally. For years, she was denied visas to the United States because of the McCarran Act.
She was on a blacklist.
Absolutely. She had to get special waivers just to visit. Her youthful radicalism had real-world consequences for a long time.
And then there is the Irish question. We started with her birth in Dublin. As the troubles escalated in the later 20th century, how did she relate to that part of her identity?
This is where her commitment to truth over tribalism really shows up. Her biographer Peter Conradi notes she had as valid a claim to Irishness as most North Americans have to Americanness, but she grew to despise the romantic nationalism that she felt fueled the IRA.
There is a quote in the source material where she talks about hearing Irish voices.
It's from a private letter, and it's quite shocking. She wrote, "The sounds of all those Irish voices made me feel privately sick. A mad, bad world."
Privately sick. That is visceral. That is a rejection of her own tribe, in a way.
Because she saw what that tribalism was doing. She saw that the narrative of the cause was being used to justify murder and violence. For her, it was another form of the fat, relentless ego, but a collective one. Our side is good, your side is bad, therefore we can kill you. She hated anything that blinded people to the concrete humanity of others.
So whether it was a jealous mother-in-law, a selfish theater director, or a political movement, the enemy was always the same. Blindness, self-centered illusion.
Exactly. The enemy is the refusal to see reality clearly.
We have to talk about the end. Because for a woman who lived entirely in her mind, who prized consciousness and attention and nuance above everything else, the end of her life was a particularly cruel irony.
It is the most heartbreaking chapter of the story. In 1997, after a couple of years of what she called a writer's block that was clearly something more, Iris Murdoch was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease.
The fading of the light, the great mind unraveling.
She described it to her husband as being in a very bad, quiet place. She lost her words. She lost her ability to write, to read. The woman who had translated Plato and written the sea eventually sat in front of the Teletubbies on TV, pointing at the screen, unable to articulate what she saw.
And her husband, John Bayley, the man who found sex ridiculous, the man who stayed in the harbor all those years, he became her primary caretaker.
He did. And he did something very public and very controversial. He wrote a memoir, Iris, a memoir later retitled Elegy for Iris. He published the first part of it while she was still alive, and the full book came out shortly before she died in 1999.
And people had strong feelings about this.
Very strong feelings. The book was a sensation. It was adapted into that famous movie with Judi Dench and Kate Winslet. But in the literary world, it caused a scandal. Some people felt Bayley was exploiting her. They felt he was revealing her indignity, the incontinence, the confusion, her vulnerability for his own fame and profit.
Wow.
One critic called it mischievously revelatory.
Like he was finally taking control of the narrative, after all those years of being the quiet one. The enchanter is gone, now I'm the writer.
There is that interpretation.
Yeah.
That he was settling some kind of score, but there is a kinder one, and I think it's the more accurate one, which is that in those final years, Bayley was finally passing the ultimate M&D test.
How so? Explain that.
He was looking at her, not as the famous genius, not as the wandering, unfaithful wife, not as the intimidating intellect, but as a vulnerable, broken human being in front of him who needed care. And he loved her. He fed her, he dressed her, he sat with her. The memoir is a record of him paying attention to her when she could no longer pay attention to anything at all.
That is beautiful. It turns the controversy into a final act of love, a final moral act in her own terms.
It does. It shows that in the end, the simple, ridiculous husband was the one who could see her justly, who could love the reality of her, not the idea.
So what does this all mean? We've looked at the war, the affairs, the philosophy, the books, the disease. When we put it all together, what is the legacy of Iris Murdoch?
I think her legacy is that she built a bridge. She built a bridge between the inner life, the secret thoughts we have in the shower, the jealousies, the fears, our private mental landscape, and the real world of moral action.
She didn't let us off the hook. She didn't let us say, well, my actions were fine, so I'm a good person.
No, she demanded more from us. She demanded that we purify our vision. She taught us that we are all pilgrims trying to see through the fog of our own selfishness. And she gave us the tools, art, beauty, nature, love, to help clear that fog, even for a moment.
I want to leave the listener with a final thought. It's a quote of hers, and I think it sums up everything we've talked about today. She said, "Love is the extremely difficult realization that something other than oneself is real."
It sounds so simple, like something on a greeting card. But try doing it. Try really, truly believing and acting on that for a whole day. It's the hardest work in the world.
So here is the challenge for you listening right now. Next time you feel that flash of irritation or judgment or jealousy towards someone, maybe it's your own version of the daughter-in-law D, or a rival at work, or just a stranger on the internet, ask yourself a question.
Ask yourself, is the problem with them? Or is my lens dirty?
Is it a failure of my own vision? Can I look again? Can I unself just for a second and try to see them justly? That's the Murdoch challenge.
And it's a lifelong project. You never really finish.
It certainly is. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us into the mind of Iris Murdoch.
It's been a pleasure.
See you next time.